The bruise on Rose Dalton's cheek had turned a deep purple by the time she stumbled into the dusty streets of Randsburg, California, her vision blurred by tears and the swelling around her left eye. It was June of 1897, and the mining town sat baking under a merciless sun that seemed to mirror the cruelty she had endured just hours before in the saloon where she worked. She had made the mistake of smiling at a stranger who had tipped his hat to her, a simple gesture of politeness that her employer, Marcus Thornton, considered a personal affront to his claim over her. He did not own her, not legally, but in this harsh land where gold fever had stripped men of their humanity, possession was 9/10 of the law, and Marcus believed she belonged to him simply because he paid her wages and provided her a room above his establishment. Rose pressed a trembling hand to her ribs, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through her side with every breath. She had tried to explain, tried to tell Marcus that she meant nothing by the smile, that it was simply common courtesy, but his fists had answered before his words could. The other girls who worked at the saloon had looked away, their eyes filled with pity, but their mouths sealed shut by fear. They knew that crossing Marcus meant finding themselves on the street, or worse. And in a town like Randsburg, where opportunities for women were scarce as rain in August, they could not afford to lose their positions. Rose understood their silence, but it did not make the loneliness any easier to bear. She stumbled toward the general store, hoping to find some small measure of kindness from Mrs. Patterson, the proprietor's wife, who had always treated her with a gentle warmth that reminded Rose of her mother back in Missouri. But as she rounded the corner, her boot caught on a loose board in the wooden walkway, and she fell forward, her hands barely breaking her fall as she crashed onto the dusty ground. Pain exploded through her body, and she lay there for a moment, wondering if it might be easier to simply stay down, to let the desert heat and her injuries claim her rather than face another day of Marcus Thornton's brutality. "Madam, are you hurt?" A deep voice cut through her despair, and she felt strong hands gently helping her to sit up. "Take your time now. No need to rush." Rose looked up through her good eye and found herself staring into a face that seemed carved from sun-weathered leather, with eyes the color of creek water in spring. The man wore a dusty brown hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, and his expression held genuine concern rather than the calculating assessment she had grown accustomed to from men in this town. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with the lean build of someone who spent his days working cattle rather than digging for gold. "I'm fine," she whispered, though the words came out broken and unconvincing. She tried to pull away from his grasp, instinct telling her that accepting help from a man would only lead to more trouble, but her body refused to cooperate, and she sagged against his supporting arm. "You are not fine," he said firmly, but his tone remained gentle. "Your face tells a story that no woman should have to live through. Let me help you to the doctor." "I cannot afford a doctor," Rose admitted, shame coloring her words, "and I should get back before Marcus realizes I left." The man's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flashed in those creek water eyes. "Marcus Thornton did this to you?" Rose did not answer, but her silence spoke volumes. The cowboy carefully helped her to her feet, his movements deliberate and respectful, never grabbing or forcing, always giving her the option to refuse his assistance. She found herself leaning against him despite her better judgment, drawn by the solid steadiness he projected, so different from the volatile unpredictability of Marcus. "My name is Wade Barrett," he said as they walked slowly down the street. "I've been working at the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of town. I came in today to pick up supplies and wire some money to my sister back in Texas. If Marcus Thornton laid hands on you for something as innocent as a smile, then he does not deserve to have you under his roof another night." "You do not understand," Rose said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nowhere else to go. Marcus pays me $4 a week to serve drinks and keep the tables clean. Without that money, I cannot save enough to buy a ticket back east. I've been here 8 months, and I've only managed to save $11. Wade guided her toward the small boarding house run by the widow Sarah Mackenzie, a respectable woman known for her fierce independence and her willingness to help those in need. "How much is a ticket to Missouri?" he asked. $23 for a third-class seat, Rose replied. "But that is not your concern. You have been kind to help me this far, but I cannot ask for more." "You did not ask," Wade pointed out. "I am offering." He paused at the bottom of the boarding house steps. "Mrs. Mackenzie is a fair woman. She might have work for you, and her rates are reasonable for a room. Between what you have saved and what I can lend you, we can get you out from under Thornton's thumb." Rose felt tears burning in her eyes again, but this time they were not born entirely of pain and despair. "Why would you do this for a stranger? You do not even know me." Wade met her gaze steadily, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart skip despite the circumstances. "My mother died when I was 14, he said quietly. "My father used to beat her when he had been drinking, which was most nights. She would smile anyway, would sing to me and my sister, would pretend that everything was fine even when we could see the bruises she tried to hide. One night he hit her too hard and she never woke up. I swore then that I would never stand by and let a man hurt a woman if I had the power to stop it. So that is why I am helping you, miss." "Dalton," she supplied. "Rose Dalton." "Miss Dalton," he continued, "I may be just a cowboy who spends his days chasing stubborn cattle and mending fences, but I have a little money saved, and I would rather spend it helping you get free than watch you go back to a man who thinks he has the right to use you as a punching bag." The sincerity in his voice undid something in Rose's chest, some tight knot of self-preservation that had kept her emotions locked down for so long. She found herself nodding, accepting his help even though every instinct she had developed since arriving in Randsburg told her not to trust any man's kindness. But Wade Barrett did not feel like the other men she had encountered in this brutal town. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that seemed rooted in principle rather than ego. Mrs. Mackenzie answered the door with flour dusting her apron and suspicion in her eyes, but the moment she saw Rose's battered face, her expression shifted to maternal fury. "Who did this to you, child?" she demanded, ushering them inside without waiting for an invitation. Her boarding house smelled of fresh bread and coffee, scents that reminded Rose so powerfully of home that she nearly broke down entirely. "Marcus Thornton, madam," Wade said when Rose could not find her voice. "Miss Dalton needs a safe place to stay, and I was hoping you might have a room available, and perhaps some work she could do to earn her keep." Sarah Mackenzie was a woman in her 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had survived the loss of her husband in a mining accident and built a successful business from nothing. She looked Wade up and down, assessing him with the sharp eye of someone who had learned to judge character quickly. "I know you," she said finally. "You work for Robert Richardson at the Double R. He speaks highly of you." "Yes, madam," Wade confirmed. "I have been with him for 3 years now." "Then I will trust your judgment in this matter, Mrs. Mackenzie said, turning her attention to Rose. "Come with me, dear. Let us get you cleaned up and see about those injuries. As for work, I could use help with the cooking and cleaning. My arthritis has been troubling me something fierce lately, and I have been thinking about taking on an assistant. The room and board would be free in exchange for the work, and I could pay you $3 a week besides." Rose's mind reeled at this sudden turn of fortune. "That is very generous, Mrs. Mackenzie, but I should tell you that Marcus will not be happy about this. He might cause trouble." "Let him try," the older woman said, with steel in her voice. "I have been dealing with bullies and blowhards since before he was born. Marcus Thornton does not scare me, and if he sets foot on my property to cause trouble, I will introduce him to my late husband's shotgun. Now, Mr. Barrett, you have been very kind to help this young woman, but I need to tend to her injuries in private. Why do not you come back tomorrow afternoon to check on her, and we can discuss the particulars then?" Wade tipped his hat to both women, but his eyes lingered on Rose for a moment longer. "I will do that, madam. Miss Dalton, you are safe here. You have my word that I will help you however I can." After he left, Mrs. Mackenzie led Rose to a small room on the second floor that looked out over the main street of Randsburg. The accommodations were simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small wardrobe for clothes. Compared to the cramped, dingy space above the saloon that smelled of tobacco smoke and spilled whiskey, it felt like a palace. "Let me fetch some water and bandages," Mrs. Mackenzie said, "and I will make you some willow bark tea for the pain. You just sit down and rest yourself." As Rose lowered herself carefully onto the bed, she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in months: hope. It was fragile as spun glass, this hope, easily shattered by harsh reality. But it was there nonetheless, kindled by the unexpected kindness of a cowboy who had no reason to help her except that he believed it was the right thing to do. Over the next few days, Rose settled into her new life at the boarding house. Mrs. Mackenzie proved to be as good as her word, treating Rose's injuries with gentle efficiency and never pressing her to talk about what had happened until she was ready. The work was hard but honest, involving cooking meals for the handful of boarders who rented rooms, washing linens, sweeping floors, and helping Mrs. Mackenzie with the endless tasks required to keep the establishment running smoothly. Wade came to visit every afternoon when his work at the ranch allowed, bringing small gifts that spoke of thoughtfulness rather than obligation: a jar of honey from a wild hive he had found, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a new pair of work gloves when he noticed her hands were becoming raw from the washing. They would sit on the porch of the boarding house and talk, their conversations ranging from the practical details of Rose's plans to return to Missouri to deeper subjects like their childhoods, their dreams, and the things they feared. Rose learned that Wade had been born in Texas but left after his mother's death, unable to stay in the house where she had suffered so much. He had worked his way west, taking jobs on various ranches, learning the cattle trade from men who valued hard work and integrity. He sent money to his younger sister whenever he could, helping her pay for the teaching college she attended in Austin, and he dreamed of one day having his own small ranch where he could raise horses and perhaps a family if he was lucky enough to find a woman who could tolerate a man who spent his days covered in dust and smelling of livestock. In turn, Rose shared her own story. She had come to California with her fiancé, Daniel, who had been convinced they would strike it rich in the gold fields. But Daniel had contracted fever within 2 months of their arrival, and he had died before they could marry, leaving Rose alone in a strange land with no family and no resources. She had taken the job at Marcus's saloon out of desperation, not fully understanding what she was agreeing to until it was too late, and she found herself trapped by circumstance and fear. "Do you still want to go back to Missouri?" Wade asked one afternoon as they sat watching the sun paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. It had been 2 weeks since their first meeting, and Rose's bruises had faded to yellow-green shadows that would soon disappear entirely. Rose considered the question carefully. "I thought I did," she admitted. "When I first arrived here, all I wanted was to escape this place and return to everything familiar. But now I am not certain. My parents passed away before I left, and I have only distant cousins back east who made it clear they saw me as an obligation rather than family. What am I returning to, really? A place where I once felt at home, but which holds no actual home for me anymore." "Then stay?" Wade said. The words coming out rushed, as though he had been holding them back for days, and they finally broke free of their own accord. "Stay in Randsburg. Not at the boarding house necessarily, though Mrs. Mackenzie seems to value your company and your work, but stay in this area where you have started to build something new." "Why?" Rose asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. There had been something growing between them during these afternoon visits, something tender and promising that neither of them had acknowledged aloud, but that colored every conversation and lingered in every glance. Wade turned to face her fully, and the vulnerability in his expression made her breath catch. "Because in these 2 weeks, I have come to care for you more than I thought possible. I know it is fast, and I know you have been through something terrible, and I am not trying to push you into anything before you are ready. But I would be lying if I said I did not wake up every morning thinking about seeing you that afternoon, or if I claimed that the idea of you leaving on a train bound for Missouri did not make my chest feel like it was being squeezed in a vice." Rose reached out and took his hand, marveling at the calluses on his palm that spoke of honest labor, so different from Marcus's soft, cruel hands. I care for you too, she said quietly. You have shown me a kindness I had almost forgotten existed. You helped me when you had no reason to, and you expect nothing in return except perhaps my company, which I give gladly. But I am afraid, Wade. I am afraid of trusting again, of letting someone close enough to hurt me. Daniel's death broke my heart, and Marcus's cruelty nearly broke my spirit. I do not know if I have it in me to risk that kind of pain again. I cannot promise that I will never hurt you, Wade said honestly, because people who care about each other inevitably cause pain sometimes, even when they do not mean to. But I can promise that I will never raise my hand to you in anger, and I will never try to control who you smile at or how you live your life. If we were to build something together, it would be a partnership built on respect and trust, not ownership and fear. Before Rose could respond, the sound of boots on the porch steps interrupted them, and they looked up to see Robert Richardson, Wade's employer, climbing toward them with his hat in his hands and an apologetic expression on his weathered face. Richardson was a man in his 50s, with a reputation for fairness and straight dealing that had earned him respect throughout the territory. "Wade, Miss Dalton," he said with a nod to each of them. "I am sorry to interrupt, but Wade, I need you back at the ranch. We have some trouble with rustlers hitting the north pasture, and I need every man I can trust riding out at first light tomorrow." Wade stood immediately, his hand moving reluctantly from Rose's grasp. "Of course, Mr. Richardson, I will be there." "Could be dangerous," Richardson warned. "These are not just opportunistic thieves. They are organized, and they have been hitting several ranches in the area. The sheriff is putting together a posse, and he has asked for volunteers who can handle themselves. I told him you would be willing." "I will do whatever is needed," Wade confirmed, but his eyes moved to Rose with clear reluctance. "But I should be back within a few days, a week at most." After Richardson left, Wade turned back to Rose, and she could see the conflict in his expression. "I hate the timing of this," he said. "We were in the middle of an important conversation, and now I have to ride out into potential danger without knowing where we stand." Rose made a decision in that moment, one driven by the realization that life was uncertain and chances for happiness were rare as diamonds in this harsh land. She stood and closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Come back safe," she said, "and when you do, we will continue this conversation and see where it leads us. But Wade, I want you to know that I have already made up my mind about one thing. I am staying in California. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I have found a reason to stay right here." The smile that broke across Wade's face was like sunrise over the desert, full of warmth and promise. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy that felt more profound than any kiss. "Then I will come back," he said. "Wild horses and rustlers combined could not keep me away." He left that evening, and Rose watched from her window as he rode out of town on his sturdy bay gelding, his bedroll and supplies secured behind his saddle. Mrs. Mackenzie came to stand beside her, placing a comforting hand on Rose's shoulder. "That is a good man," the older woman said, "the kind you can build a life with, if you have the courage to try again." "How did you know you could trust your husband?" Rose asked. "How did you know he would not turn out to be someone different from who he appeared?" "I did not know for certain," Mrs. Mackenzie admitted. "But Thomas showed me through his actions day after day that he was worthy of my trust. He was patient with my fears, consistent in his affections, and true to his word even when it cost him. Wade reminds me of Thomas in many ways. He has that same quiet integrity, that same gentle strength. But ultimately, you have to decide for yourself whether the risk of loving him is worth the potential reward." The week that followed was one of the longest Rose had ever endured. She threw herself into her work at the boarding house, scrubbing floors until they gleamed and cooking elaborate meals that drew compliments from all the boarders. But underneath the busyness, anxiety gnawed at her. Every time she heard horses on the street, she rushed to the window hoping to see Wade returning safely, only to be disappointed when it proved to be someone else. On the 8th day, Marcus Thornton appeared at the boarding house door. Rose was in the kitchen preparing the midday meal when she heard his voice in the front hall, smooth as snake oil, and twice as poisonous. "I am here to speak with Rose Dalton," he said to Mrs. Mackenzie. "She is my employee, and she left without giving proper notice. I am willing to forgive her lapse in judgment if she returns to work immediately." "Miss Dalton is no longer your employee," Mrs. Mackenzie said firmly. "She works for me now, and she will not be returning to your establishment under any circumstances." "That is not your decision to make," Marcus replied, his voice hardening. "Rose, I know you can hear me. Stop hiding in the kitchen and come out here so we can discuss this like reasonable adults." Rose's hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. She had known this confrontation was coming, had been dreading it since the day she walked away from the saloon, but she had hoped that Marcus would simply let her go rather than pursue the matter. She should have known better. Men like Marcus did not give up their possessions easily, even when those possessions were human beings with wills of their own. She walked into the front hall, forcing her spine straight and her chin up despite the fear that made her knees weak. "I am not hiding, Marcus. I am working, which is exactly what I will continue to do here at Mrs. Mackenzie's boarding house. I apologize for leaving without notice, but under the circumstances, I think you can understand why I felt it necessary." Marcus's eyes traveled over her face, noting the faded bruises, and something like shame flickered across his features before being quickly suppressed. "I lost my temper," he said. "It was wrong of me, and I apologize. But you provoked me, Rose. You know how I feel about you, and yet you persisted in entertaining the attentions of other men." "I smiled at a customer," Rose said, keeping her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. "That is a part of the job you hired me to do, to be pleasant and welcoming to your patrons. If you wanted someone who would never look at another man, you should have been honest about your expectations instead of pretending to be my employer when you really wanted to be my owner." "I have a right to protect what is mine," Marcus said, his facade of reasonableness cracking. "I am not yours," Rose said, and the words felt powerful, like a declaration of independence. "I never was, and I never will be. I worked for you, Marcus, that is all. You paid me wages to serve drinks and clean tables, not to be your property. And now I work for Mrs. Mackenzie, and you have no claim on me whatsoever." Marcus took a step forward, his hand rising as though to strike her again, but Mrs. Mackenzie moved between them with surprising speed for a woman of her age. "That is far enough, Thornton," she said, and there was steel in her voice that would have impressed a cavalry officer. "You have no power here, and if you touch her, I will have the sheriff arrest you for assault. Now get off my property before I fetch that shotgun I mentioned." For a moment, Marcus looked as though he might argue, might push the confrontation into violence, but then footsteps sounded on the porch behind him, and a familiar voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "I would strongly suggest you listen to Mrs. Mackenzie," Wade said, stepping into view with dust coating his clothes and exhaustion evident in his eyes, but with a dangerous edge to his expression that Rose had never seen before. "She is a crack shot with that scattergun, and I suspect the sheriff would rule it self-defense given the circumstances." Marcus whirled to face Wade, his face flushing red with anger and humiliation. "This does not concern you, Cowboy." "Actually, it concerns me very much," Wade replied, moving to stand beside Rose in a gesture of protection that did not require words. "Miss Dalton is under my protection, and I will not allow you to threaten or harm her. You should leave now while you still can do so under your own power." The two men stared at each other, and Rose held her breath, afraid that violence was about to erupt in Mrs. Mackenzie's front hall. But finally Marcus seemed to realize he was outmatched, not just physically but morally. Whatever support he might have had in this confrontation evaporated under the combined disapproval of Mrs. Mackenzie and Wade. "This is not over," Marcus said, but the words lacked conviction. He was a bully, and like most bullies, he was a coward at heart who only felt powerful when facing someone weaker and more vulnerable than himself. He turned and stalked out of the boarding house, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The moment he was gone, Rose felt her knees buckle, and Wade caught her before she could fall, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the hard edge he had shown Marcus. "You are safe," he murmured into her hair. I am here, and you are safe. You came back, she whispered, her hands clutching at his shirt as though afraid he might disappear if she let go. I told you wild horses could not keep me away, he said with a tired smile. Though I will admit, rustlers gave it a good try. We caught up with them 2 days north of here, and there was some excitement. But the sheriff's posse prevailed in the end. All the stolen cattle have been recovered, and the thieves are on their way to stand trial in the territorial court. Mrs. Mackenzie tactfully excused herself, citing some invented task that required her attention in the kitchen, leaving Rose and Wade alone in the front hall. Rose pulled back slightly so she could see his face, noting the new scrapes on his knuckles and a bruise forming along his jawline. You are hurt, she said, touching the bruise with careful fingers. Nothing serious, he assured her. One of the rustlers took a swing at me before the sheriff got him under control, but I have had worse. The important thing is that I am back and we can pick up where we left off before I had to leave. They moved to the porch, reclaiming their seats on the bench where they had spent so many afternoons talking, and Rose found herself leaning against Wade's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I was afraid, she admitted. Not just that you might be hurt or killed, though that fear was real enough, but I was afraid that I had imagined the connection between us, that when you came back, things would be different, and I would find out I'd been foolish to hope. Wade wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and the gesture felt natural as breathing. You were not foolish, and you did not imagine anything. If anything, I have been thinking these past days that what I said before I left did not go far enough. Rose, I am in love with you. I know it is fast. And I know conventional wisdom says we should court for months or even years before declaring such feelings, but I am not a man who believes in wasting time or hiding from the truth. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me. Rose's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. I love you too, she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I did not think I could feel this way again after everything that has happened. But you have shown me that not all men are like Marcus or even like Daniel, who was good but weak. You are strong in the ways that matter, Wade. You are kind and honest and brave, and you make me believe that I can smile at anyone I want without fear of punishment. You should be able to smile at the whole world if you choose, Wade said fiercely. Your smile is yours to give as you see fit, and no man has the right to police it or punish you for sharing it. I want to be the man you smile at most often, but I would never try to be the only man you smile at. That kind of possessiveness is not love. It is ownership, and you deserve better. They sat together as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the dusty streets of Randsburg in gold and amber light. Around them, the town went about its business, miners trudging home from their claims, merchants closing their shops, families gathering for evening meals. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary town, but for Rose, it felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. What happens now? She asked eventually. I'm happy working for Mrs. Mackenzie, and you have your job at the Double R Ranch. How do we build a life together when our circumstances are what they are? I have been thinking about that, Wade said. Mr. Richardson has offered me the position of foreman. The current foreman is retiring at the end of the summer, and Richardson says I have earned the promotion. It comes with a significant increase in wages and a small house on the ranch property. I know it is not much, just a 3-room cabin, really, but it would be ours if you are willing to marry me and make that life together. Rose lifted her head from his shoulder to look at him properly. Are you proposing to me, Wade Barrett? I am, he confirmed, and she could see nervousness flickering in his eyes despite his confident words. I do not have a ring yet, and I know I should have planned this better, made it more romantic, but the words just came out because they have been sitting on my tongue since the moment I realized I loved you. Rose Dalton, will you marry me and become Rose Barrett? Will you take a chance on a cowboy who can promise you nothing but hard work, simple living, and a heart that belongs entirely to you? The answer came without hesitation, rising from somewhere deep inside Rose that had healed in the weeks since Wade had helped her up from that dusty street. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, Wade Barrett. I will take that chance, and I will build that life with you, and I will smile at you every single day for the rest of our lives. Wade's kiss was everything a first kiss should be, tender and reverent and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools, and Mrs. Mackenzie was watching from the kitchen window with tears running down her face and a satisfied smile on her lips. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony held at the church on the edge of Randsburg. Mrs. Mackenzie stood up with Rose, having become the closest thing to family that Rose had in California, and Robert Richardson stood up with Wade, having given his blessing to the match and his foreman's position as a wedding gift. The whole town turned out for the celebration, with one notable exception. Marcus Thornton had left Randsburg 2 weeks after his confrontation at the boarding house, selling his saloon to a businessman from San Francisco and disappearing without a word to anyone. Rose felt nothing but relief at his departure, one less shadow hanging over her new beginning. The cabin on the Double R Ranch was indeed small, but Rose loved it immediately. Wade had spent every spare moment fixing it up, mending the roof, replacing broken floorboards, even building a new porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the stars emerge over the California hills. It was theirs, a home built on love and respect rather than fear and control, and Rose felt safer within its simple walls than she had felt anywhere since her parents had died. She quickly adapted to the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for Wade before he rode out to oversee the hands, then spending her days tending a vegetable garden, caring for the chickens Wade had purchased, and managing the household tasks that kept their small home running smoothly. In the afternoons, she would often ride out to bring Wade his lunch, and they would steal a few precious moments together, sitting in the shade of a cottonwood tree and talking about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Rose confessed one afternoon as they watched a new calf learning to walk on wobbly legs. "I know we have only been married 3 months, and perhaps it is too soon to think about such things, but I want to fill our home with laughter and noise and all the chaos that comes with little ones running around." Wade's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of two people who had become one. "I want that too," he said. "I want to give our children the childhood I did not have, one full of love and security. I want sons to teach about horses and cattle, and daughters to spoil and protect, and I want to see you smile at them the way I have always dreamed a mother should smile at her babies." "How many children are we talking about?" Rose asked with amusement in her voice. "As many as we are blessed with, Guilty," Wade replied, "though I suppose we should start with one and see how we manage before we plan for a whole brood." As it turned out, they did not have to wait long. By Christmas of that year, Rose was pregnant, her belly just beginning to show the first signs of the new life growing inside her. Wade treated her like she was made of spun glass, constantly worrying that she was working too hard or not eating enough, until Rose finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not dying, and that she needed him to trust her to know her own limits. "I just want to take care of you," he said, looking so earnest that Rose could not help but smile. "You do take care of me," she assured him. "Every single day you show me through your actions that I am cherished and valued. But part of taking care of me is trusting me to be strong enough to carry this baby and manage our household without wrapping me in cotton wool. I am tougher than I look, Wade Barrett, and pregnancy is not a disease." Their son was born in July of 1898, arriving during a summer thunderstorm that broke the heat and brought the scent of rain to the parched earth. Wade paced the porch while Mrs. Mackenzie and the midwife attended to Rose inside, his face pale with worry, until he heard the lusty cry of his newborn son. When he was finally allowed into the bedroom, he found Rose propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, cradling a red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair. "Meet William Thomas Barrett," Rose said, using the names they had chosen together, William for Wade's middle name, and Thomas to honor Mrs. Mackenzie's late husband. "Your son." Wade approached the bed as though walking on sacred ground, his eyes fixed on the tiny person Rose held. When she placed the baby in his arms, something fundamental shifted in his expression, a deepening of the love and commitment he already felt, expanding to encompass this new life they had created together. "He is perfect," Wade whispered, touching one tiny fist with a finger made rough by years of ranch work. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am to have both of you." William grew into a healthy, happy toddler who followed his father around the ranch whenever possible, his small legs working overtime to keep up with Wade's long strides. Rose watched them together, her heart full to bursting with the knowledge that her son would grow up knowing only love and kindness from his father, never having to fear violence or cruelty. When William was 2 years old, Rose became pregnant again, and this time their daughter arrived with less drama, sliding into the world on a cool spring morning as if eager to join the family. They named her Margaret Rose, and from the moment she opened her eyes, it was clear she had inherited her father's creek water gaze and her mother's determined spirit. The years passed in a pattern of seasons and growth, both of the land and of their family. Wade's skill as foreman brought prosperity to the Double R Ranch, and Robert Richardson rewarded his hard work with increasingly better wages and opportunities. Rose became known throughout the area for her kindness and her excellent cooking, often hosting gatherings that brought together the scattered ranching community for celebrations and fellowship. When William turned 7, Wade began teaching him to ride properly, sitting him on a gentle mare and walking alongside until the boy had the confidence to take the reins himself. Rose watched from the porch, Margaret balanced on her hip, as her husband and son circled the corral together, Wade's patient instructions carrying on the afternoon breeze. "Papa is teaching William to be like him," Margaret observed with the precocious wisdom of a 4-year-old. "Your papa is teaching William to be his own man," Rose corrected gently. "He will teach him skills and values, but he will never try to force him into a mold or punish him for being himself. That is the difference between a good father and a bad one." "Will Papa teach me to ride too?" Margaret asked. "If you want to learn, then yes, I am certain he will," Rose assured her daughter. "Your papa believes that girls can do anything boys can do, and he will never tell you that something is impossible just because you are female." That evening, after the children were asleep in their shared bedroom, Rose and Wade sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, watching the stars emerge over the California hills. Wade's arm was around Rose's shoulders, and her head rested against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going back to Missouri? Building this life with me instead of seeking something else?" Rose lifted her head to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression that still surfaced sometimes, despite all the years they had been together. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "That day you helped me up from the street. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. You showed me that I could smile without fear, that I could love without terror, that I could build a life based on partnership rather than subjugation. Why would I ever regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Wade said. "That this life we have built is enough for you." "It is more than enough," Rose said, cupping his face in her hands the way she had done so many times before. "You are more than enough, Wade. You always have been. From that very first day when you saw a stranger in distress and decided to help rather than look away. You made sure I could smile at anyone I wanted, and in doing so, you gave me the freedom to choose who I smiled at most. And I chose you, Wade Barrett. I choose you every day, and I will keep choosing you for the rest of my life." Their kiss held all the passion and tenderness of two people who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger for it. When they finally drew apart, both of them were smiling, and Rose felt a surge of gratitude for the strange path that had brought her to this moment, to this man, to this life she never could have imagined during those dark days in Marcus Thornton's saloon. As the years continued to unfold, the Barrett family became a fixture of the ranching community around Randsburg. Wade's reputation for fairness and skill grew, and eventually Robert Richardson made him a partner in the Double R Ranch, acknowledging that much of the operation's success was due to Wade's management and vision. The partnership came with a larger house, a proper ranch house with multiple bedrooms and a parlor where they could entertain, though Rose always maintained a fondness for their first little cabin where they had begun their married life. William grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his father's work ethic with his mother's compassion, and he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher when he turned 18. Margaret proved to be every bit as capable as her brother, learning to ride and rope with a skill that made her father's chest swell with pride, and she declared her intention to become a veterinarian, a bold ambition for a young woman in that era, but one that her parents supported wholeheartedly. Rose and Wade added 2 more children to their family over the years, another daughter named Sarah and a son they named Robert after Wade's employer and partner. The house rang with laughter and occasional arguments, with the sounds of children growing up and learning about the world, and Rose often paused in her daily tasks to simply breathe in the joy of it all, remembering how close she had come to missing this life entirely. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Rose with a trip to San Francisco, arranging for Mrs. Mackenzie to stay with the children so they could have a week alone together. It was the first time they had left the ranch for more than a day since their marriage, and Rose felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness as they boarded the train. "I have never stayed in a proper hotel," she confessed, as the landscape rolled past their window. "What if I do not know how to behave?" Wade took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "You will be yourself, which is the finest lady I know, regardless of what hotel etiquette might dictate. Besides, I reserved us a suite at the Palace Hotel, and I'm fairly certain they will be thrilled to have our business whether you know which fork to use at dinner or not." San Francisco was a revelation, a city of steep hills and elegant buildings that seemed impossibly sophisticated compared to the rough mining town where they had met. Wade had planned everything meticulously, taking Rose to restaurants where waiters in white jackets served dishes she could not pronounce, to theaters where they saw performances that made her laugh and cry, to shops where he insisted on buying her dresses and jewelry far finer than anything she had ever owned. On their last night in the city, they stood on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out over the twinkling lights that stretched toward the bay. Rose wore one of her new dresses, a deep blue silk that Wade had chosen because he said it matched her eyes, and she felt like a princess from one of the storybooks she read to their children. "This has been magical," she said, leaning back against Wade's chest, "but I find myself eager to get home to our family, to our life on the ranch. Is that strange?" "Not at all," Wade said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It means we have built something worth returning to, something that satisfies us more than all the luxury and excitement a city can offer. I brought you here because I wanted you to see that I could give you more than a simple life on a ranch if you wanted it. We could move to San Francisco, open a business, live in one of those elegant houses we passed, but I suspect you will say the same thing I would say." "Which is?" Rose prompted. "That home is not a place. It is the people you share it with. Our home is wherever our family is, and right now that is a ranch outside Randsburg, California, with 4 children who are probably driving poor Mrs. Mackenzie to distraction. This trip has been wonderful, but I am ready to go home too." They returned to the ranch to find that William had managed the operation admirably in his father's absence, handling a minor crisis with a fence break and a sick horse with the competence of someone twice his age. Margaret had kept the household running smoothly, cooking meals and managing her younger siblings with an efficiency that made Rose realize her little girl was not so little anymore. The younger children had behaved themselves reasonably well, according to Mrs. Mackenzie, though the twinkle in her eye suggested there were stories she was charitably omitting. That night, after the children were finally settled in bed and the house was quiet, Rose and Wade lay together in their room, and Wade traced lazy patterns on her arm with his fingertips. "I have been thinking," he said, "about everything that had to happen to bring us to this moment. If you had not come to California with Daniel, if he had not died, if you had not taken that job at Marcus's saloon, if you had not smiled at that stranger, if Marcus had not beaten you, if I had not happened to be in town that particular day at that particular time, we would never have met. Our children would not exist. This life we have built would never have been. It is a sobering thought, Rose agreed. I would not wish for any of those painful things to happen, and yet they led to everything I hold most dear. I suppose it is proof that even in our darkest moments, there is the potential for light if we are brave enough to reach for it. You were brave, Wade said. You took my hand that day, even though you had every reason to distrust any man who offered help. You chose to hope instead of despair, to try again instead of giving up. That bravery is what made all of this possible. We were both brave, Rose corrected. You saw someone in need and chose to help even though it would have been easier to walk away. You gave me the space to heal and the support to grow. And you never once tried to control me or own me even though you loved me. That kind of love takes courage too, Wade. The courage to trust and to respect and to see me as a full person rather than a possession. As Rose drifted towards sleep, she thought about the young woman she had been when she first arrived in Randsburg, so desperate and afraid, willing to endure abuse because she thought she had no other choice. She thought about the bruises that had once marked her face, symbols of a man's cruelty and his belief that he had the right to punish her for something as innocent as a smile. And she thought about Wade, the cowboy who had made sure she could smile at anyone she wanted, who had given her back her freedom and her dignity, and in doing so, had won her heart completely. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes and challenges, as all years do. Robert Richardson eventually retired completely, leaving Wade to run the Double R Ranch with William as his second in command. Margaret went off to veterinary college in Sacramento, one of only 3 women in her class, and she returned 2 years later with her degree and a quiet confidence that made her parents glow with pride. She set up a practice serving the ranches and farms around Randsburg, becoming the first female veterinarian in that part of California and proving through her skill and dedication that she belonged in a profession dominated by men. Sarah, their 3rd child, proved to have a gift for music, playing the piano with such feeling that people would stop their conversations to listen when she performed at church gatherings. The youngest, Robert, combined his siblings' various talents, showing aptitude for ranch work, compassion for animals, and a creative streak that expressed itself through drawing and painting. Rose and Wade watched their children grow and flourish, seeing in them the fruits of a love that had been born from kindness and nurtured through respect. They had their share of difficulties, as all families do, but they faced them together, never allowing pride or stubbornness to drive wedges between them. When arguments arose, they talked them through, remembering always that they were partners, not adversaries. On a warm summer evening when Rose was 52 and Wade was 54, they gathered with all their children and grandchildren for a celebration marking 30 years of marriage. William had married and given them 2 grandchildren, and Margaret had recently wed a fellow veterinarian she had met during her college years. The house and yard were filled with family, 3 generations of Barretts laughing and talking and enjoying the feast that Rose and her daughters had prepared. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the gathering, Wade stood and clinked his glass to call for attention. The crowd quieted, turning toward him with curiosity and affection. "I am not much for speeches," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Most of you know I'm a man of actions rather than words, but tonight, with all of you gathered here, I feel compelled to say something about the woman who has been my partner for 30 years, who has given me children and grandchildren, who has turned a rough cowboy into a better man than he ever thought he could be." He turned to face Rose, his creek water eyes still as clear and full of love as they had been the day they met. "Rose, when I found you on that dusty street in Randsburg, broken and afraid, I had no idea that helping you would be the best decision I would ever make. I thought I was just doing the right thing, standing up for someone who needed an ally. But in doing so, I found my soulmate, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. You have made every day of these 30 years a gift, and I look forward to however many more years we are blessed with together." Rose stood and moved to his side, her eyes bright with tears. "You always said you made sure I could smile at anyone I wanted," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you did. But what you really gave me was the freedom to choose my own path, to be my own person, to live without fear. And having that freedom, I chose to spend my life with you, Wade Barrett. That choice has brought me more joy than I ever dreamed possible, and I would make it again 1,000 times over." Their kiss, witnessed by their children and grandchildren, held all the tenderness of 3 decades together and the promise of years yet to come. And when they broke apart, Rose was smiling, that same smile that had gotten her beaten so long ago, but now given freely and without fear to the man who had taught her that love should liberate, not imprison. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories being shared among the generations. The grandchildren ran wild under the stars, their laughter ringing across the ranch, while the adults sat around talking about everything and nothing, bound together by the ties of family and the foundation that Rose and Wade had built through their example of what marriage should be. As the night grew late and families began departing to their own homes, Rose and Wade found themselves alone on their porch once more, the place where so much of their love story had unfolded. Wade pulled Rose close, and she settled against him with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. "Do you remember what you asked me on our 20th anniversary?" Rose said. "Whether I ever regretted staying in California?" "I remember," Wade confirmed. "You said not for a single moment." "I want you to know that is still true," Rose said. "After 30 years, after everything we have been through together, I have never once regretted the choice to stay, to marry you, to build this life. You kept your promise, Wade. You gave me a partnership built on respect and trust. You never raised your hand to me in anger. You never tried to control who I smiled at or how I lived my life. And in return, I have given you all the love in my heart, freely and joyfully every single day." Wade tightened his arms around her, and Rose felt his chest rise and fall with a deep breath. "I am the luckiest man alive," he said simply. "Not because I have money or land or success, though I am grateful for those things, but because I have you, Rose. You are my greatest treasure, my finest achievement, my heart walking around outside my body. Everything good in my life flows from the decision I made that day to help a woman in need, and I thank God every morning that I was in the right place at the right time to be that help." They sat together until the stars wheeled overhead and the moon began its descent toward the horizon. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of past pain. And when they finally went inside to their bed, they did so hand in hand. Still partners, still best friends, still deeply and profoundly in love. The years that followed were kind to Rose and Wade Barrett. They grew old together, their hair turning silver and their bodies moving more slowly, but their love remaining as strong and vital as it had been in their youth. They saw their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own, adding new branches to the family tree that had started with a cowboy's kindness on a dusty street in Randsburg. When Wade's health began to fail in his 70s, Rose cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown her, never complaining about the burden, never resenting the time required. She held his hand through the difficult days, read to him when his eyes grew too weak to manage it himself, and made sure he knew every moment how cherished he was. "I am not afraid," Wade told her one evening as they sat together watching the sunset from their porch, the view they had shared for so many decades. "I have lived a good life, loved a wonderful woman, raised fine children. When my time comes, I will go peacefully, knowing I did my best to honor the gift I was given when you agreed to be my wife." "You are not going anywhere yet," Rose said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "We still have years ahead of us, Wade Barrett. I am not ready to let you go." But death comes for everyone eventually, and on a cool October morning 2 years later, Wade slipped away peacefully in his sleep with Rose holding his hand. He was 76 years old, and he had been married to Rose for 52 years, a testament to enduring love and partnership that everyone who knew them aspired to emulate. Rose grieved, as anyone would grieve the loss of their life partner, but her grief was tempered by gratitude for the decades they had shared and by the knowledge that Wade had died as he had lived, with dignity and surrounded by love. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half the county, Rose stood before the gathered mourners and spoke about the man she had loved. "Wade Barrett was a good man," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "He was kind and honest and brave, and he believed that love should set people free rather than bind them in chains. He made sure I could smile at anyone I wanted, and in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift possible, the freedom to choose my own path. And every day, I chose him. Every single day, I chose this good man, and I will carry that choice in my heart until we meet again." Rose lived for another 11 years after Wade's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren who arrived in those final years. She never remarried, never even considered it, because to her mind, she was still married to Wade Barrett, still bound to him by ties stronger than death could sever. She spent her remaining years telling stories about him to anyone who would listen, making sure that his kindness and his principles would be remembered and passed down through the generations. On a spring morning in her 89th year, Rose died peacefully in her sleep, and her family laid her to rest beside Wade in the small cemetery overlooking Randsburg. Their headstones stood side by side, marking the final resting place of two people who had found each other in the harsh world of the Wild West and built a love story that endured through decades and beyond death itself. The epitaph on Rose's headstone, chosen by her children but reflecting words she had spoken many times, read simply, "She smiled freely and loved completely, and in doing so, she taught us all how to live." And on Wade's stone, placed there by Rose herself years before, he saw someone in need and chose kindness, and that choice changed everything. Their story became legend in the area around Randsburg, passed down through generations as an example of what love should be: respectful, freeing, supportive, and enduring. Young couples would visit their graves and pledge to build marriages like the one Rose and Wade had shared, based on partnership rather than possession, on trust rather than control. The Double R Ranch continued to operate, passed down through the Barrett family, and each new generation learned the values that Wade and Rose had embodied: hard work, integrity, compassion, and the understanding that true strength lies not in dominating others but in lifting them up. Margaret's descendants continued her veterinary practice, serving the community with the same skill and dedication she had shown. Sarah's children and grandchildren brought music to churches and schools throughout California. Robert's artistic legacy lived on in paintings that captured the beauty of the California landscape his parents had loved. But perhaps the greatest legacy Rose and Wade left behind was simpler and more profound than any professional achievement or material success. They had shown through 52 years of marriage and a lifetime of example that even in the roughest corners of the world, even in times and places where women were often treated as property rather than people, it was possible to build a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine equality. They had proven that a smile should never be something to fear, that kindness was not weakness, and that love, real love, meant wanting your partner to be fully themselves rather than trying to mold them into what you thought they should be. The bruises Marcus Thornton had inflicted on Rose that day in 1897 had faded within weeks, but the gift Wade had given her in that dusty street in Randsburg endured for a lifetime and beyond. He had made sure she could smile at anyone she wanted. And in doing so, he had given her back her freedom, her dignity, and her sense of self-worth. And she, in turn, had given him a love that was freely chosen and joyfully expressed, a love that had filled his life with meaning and purpose. Their story was not one of dramatic rescues or grand gestures, though it had started with a cowboy helping a woman in distress. Instead, it was a story of daily choices, of small kindnesses accumulated over decades, of respect given and received, of trust built slowly and maintained carefully. It was a story of two imperfect people who chose to build something beautiful together, who weathered storms and celebrated joys, who raised children and grew old together, who loved each other fiercely and faithfully from that first meeting until death parted them and even beyond. And in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, where women were beaten for crimes as minor as smiling at the wrong man, their story stood as a reminder that there was another way, a better way, a way built on kindness and respect, and the simple but profound belief that every person deserved the freedom to smile at anyone they wanted without fear of punishment. That was the legacy of Rose and Wade Barrett, and it lived on long after they were gone, inspiring others to choose love over control, freedom over possession, and partnership over domination. The sun set over the California hills, as it had done for countless generations before, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere in that fading light. In the stories passed down through the years, Rose and Wade Barrett lived on, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would never truly die.